Hello and welcome to the base. Today we have a slightly different episode and I've taken on Oliver's role here because I'm going to be interviewing Oliver today about Cormac McCarthy. The next event we have coming up is a staged reading of The Sunset Limited at Unheard in Westminster on December the 18th with Aris Roussanos giving a response. And Ollie is a huge fan of Cormac McCarthy, and for quite some time we've been interested in looking at this play and putting it on stage. So that's what we're going to do. And we thought it'd be a good opportunity to have a small chat about Cormac McCarthy, who died a couple of years ago and is kind of widely seen as one of the kind of great writers, possibly of history, from what Ollie has told me. And I am a complete idiot on Cormac McCarthy. And so I will be playing the idiot here and talking to Oliver about the work of Cormac McCarthy. So, Ollie, thanks for joining me on the base.
Pleasure.
Yeah, absolute honor to meet you. It's good, sir. You are a big fan of Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, only quite recently, actually. I think I had read The Road many years ago, but it was only the publication of his final two novels, The Passenger and Stella Maris, that I actually really got kind of hooked. Then went back and read pretty much everything. That was 2022, so quite recently. But it had such a big impact that I was completely hooked, and have been really excited for doing this event. And I think it's an amazing chance. You know, we'll get on to what this particular text that we're going to be reading on the 18th of December is, The Sunset Limited. But it's going to be a very rare, almost unique opportunity to see a Cormac McCarthy play brought to life by great actors. So yeah, we thought we'd do a little brief, basic intro to Cormac McCarthy. So his life sort of nearly straddles the whole of the 20th century. He lived almost 90 years, a long life. He was born in 1933. He's actually born Charles Joseph McCarthy Jr. He was raised mainly in Tennessee. So he's a kind of man of the South, and a lot of his work is set in the South. To Irish Catholic parents, which I know that Aris Roussanos, who's doing the response to Sunset Limited, is very interested in. I would like to know more about that from Aris, but he's interested in the sort of Irish Catholic lineage and how that kind of comes out in his work, which is not an obvious strand in his work, I would say. And if people are interested in McCarthy, there are lots and lots of actual experts. I'm by no means an expert, but he has a big following particularly on the internet. There are loads of like YouTube and X channels of people who are very, very deep into him. I would strongly recommend a guy on X, Aaron Gwynn, who is a big McCarthyite, and he runs lots of courses, has lots of videos where he really, really goes deep into McCarthy's life and work. But as I say, this is just a general summary. You know, he went to University of Tennessee, but then dropped out to actually join the U.S. Air Force, and he served in Alaska. Apparently was reading voraciously. That was kind of where he first started really, really reading voraciously. That's in the sort of 50s up to 1957. He then goes back to college, and there he starts writing his first short stories, starts having things published. Then he drops out again, doesn't actually complete his degree, I don't think, and moves to Chicago and is living in a shack with his first wife. And he's living like hand to mouth. He was from a relatively middle class background, but he kind of, I think he almost like builds his own shack, and he starts to try and be a writer, and he works on his first novel, which is called The Orchard Keeper, while he was working part-time in a warehouse in Chicago, and he publishes The Orchard Keeper, which is pretty good. Most like full McCarthyites would rate it probably towards the bottom of his work, but it's an interesting novel, quite short novel, and it receives reasonably good critical reception. He is compared straight away, and he will be compared to William Faulkner, the other great 20th century American writer, a lot. Their work kind of both has this sort of American Gothic kind of vibe. Lots of violence, in these first few novels, Orchard Keeper, Outer Dark. He's exploring murder, rape, pillage, all this kind of stuff. He receives quite a few grants. When I was looking over his biography, I was like, oh, there's quite a few. He kept mentioning like, oh, he gets a MacArthur Fellowship, he gets a sort of bursary from here. So he was in some ways a good example of that system working well, right? Where writers get grants and they go off to write. So he goes off on one grant to Ibiza, and actually he writes his second novel in Ibiza, and he learns Spanish there, and Spanish will become quite important in his work. A
Is
lot of the
is he
habits of dialogue.
is he sort of doing a bit of an Ernest Hemingway there? Didn't Ernest Hemingway do the same thing? Well, didn't they all go to Spain? Lots of the writers got into they went during the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
Hemingway writes For Whom the Bells Toll, which I've been reading for a long time, is set in Spain. I was just wondering if he was emulating some of the kind of.
I mean, I'm sure lots of people would see lots of similarities between Hemingway and McCarthy. They both have a strong, partly why we're interested in them as well. They're very masculine writers. Hemingway, the kind of perfect example of that. But McCarthy does have he has a kind of macho vibe about him. He was clearly a man who was a very practical man. He liked building things. He liked being out in the open, building houses, riding horses, kind of into guns and stuff like that, right? And I think that's part of the appeal of him, is that he is clearly in that world. He's not at all a literary writer of the kind that's hanging out in salons and going to parties. That's just so not his world, and he really seems to hate that world and want no part of it.
Is he a bit of an Aeschylus type figure?
Well, as in a soldier.
Yeah, Aeschylus is our thing.
Well, he was in the U.S. Air Force,
Yeah. There we go.
We don't know what his politics were. He is, whether deliberately or not, I don't know, but he never discloses his politics. You can read it in all sorts of different ways, I think. There's quite a nice little anecdote that I remember reading about after he died in these early years, where he's getting a bit of critical reception, but he's not selling much at all. He's kind of respected, well reviewed. Respected as clearly a good writer. You can tell from the early work that this is a guy who can write really, really great prose, right? But he's living in basically poverty. And I think his second wife said this: someone would call up and offer him $2,000 to come and speak at a university about his books. And he would tell them that everything he had to say was there on the page. So we would eat beans for another week. And there's something kind of very romantic and endearing about someone who he's not going to take some easy money to do some lectures about his work. He's a pure artist. He's going to live in poverty because he doesn't want to play that literary game. And I find that very, very appealing and inspiring.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the arts admire that kind of puritanical commitment to one's own beliefs and one's own vision. And yeah, it's a complicated relationship between money and art, isn't it?
There's a definite purist in him. So far he's doing well. There's some great novels there. Sutri is a really good novel, autobiographical, but he's sort of bubbling under, doing well, good literary reputation, not exploding. There is a screenplay for this like TV movie for PBS that he's asked to write, which does quite well, which is called The Gardener's Son. And this is something I find interesting about him. He doesn't have a particularly dramatic sensibility, but he is drawn towards screenplays and plays.
And when he writes The Gardener's Son, he's about 42. Right?
He's 42, and this would be the probably the biggest thing he's done at that point. He's nominated for a couple of Emmys. This particular, like a TV movie thing.
Right.
So he's another late bloomer. Like he's a real late bloomer actually. And the big breakthrough, as you say, happens in his 40s. He receives a MacArthur Fellowship, which is a very prestigious American award. I think it's separate from the Genius Award. There's these MacArthur Genius grants that they give. Quite a large sum of money, and this allowed him to spend many years researching and writing what will be his masterpiece, which is Blood Meridian, which we have spoken about on a different podcast when we were doing some of our favorite books. And yeah, it's a favorite novel of mine, widely recognized as one of the great American novels of the 20th century. It's very, very well received. You got esteemed critics like Harold Bloom calling it one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, but it still doesn't really sell. And in fact, up until 1992, which will be his big breakthrough, none of his first edition of his hardback books, he doesn't sell more than 5,000, which is that's a really small number.
Yeah.
For something to be a big blockbuster, you're talking about 1 million sales, But I think in Blood Meridian we have, and it's how it sort of relates to what we're doing on the 18th of December, we have the clearest expression of McCarthy's big theme. I think McCarthy is trying to work out, is there goodness at the core of the world? Is the world run by a good God? Is it run by nothing? Or is it run by the devil? Blood Meridian kind of seems to be suggesting that it's run by the devil, and war, predation, and violence are actually just the truth of the world. Well, I feel like McCarthy was preoccupied and kind of confused by this himself, and couldn't quite was struggling with this. He was struggling to work out, is the world good?
Would that be similar to Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment?
Definitely. I think these are the writers that relate to McCarthy best. People like Hemingway, Faulkner, Dostoevsky. He really didn't like, and he often criticized writers like Proust and Henry James, these more literary writers. For him, they weren't dealing with issues of life and death. He wanted to get to the absolute core, life and death. Is there a God? Is the world good? And anything else, these bourgeois novels of manners and people having affairs and all this kind of stuff, complete waste of time as far as he's concerned, which is very appealing.
I'm kind of that type of guy as well, I think.
Absolutely. It's
and I wish when I was younger, in a way, someone had come to me and said, "Look, read Crime and Punishment." And
yeah, absolutely.
When I read that, I was like,
absolutely. And he's very, very much a writer of the outdoors as well. If one thinks of these bourgeois novels, they mostly take place indoors, parties and salons and in houses. McCarthy's work often takes place in the wilderness.
So can I quickly ask about Blood Meridian before we move on from it? Because I've been meaning to read that. I keep going to my local bookshop because I want to support the guy there, but they never have it. I keep saying to him, "Have you got the book?" Anyway, so yeah, it's arriving. I've finally ordered it. So when it only sold 5,000 at first, but is it now? Has it kind of exploded over the 50, 60 years since? And is it now kind of widely seen as one of the great books of the last 100 years, would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what the sales figures are, but there's a film version in the works at the moment. It's definitely recognized as one of the greatest novels.
I can't wait to read it.
Shall I just read the opening paragraph?
Yeah, please, yeah.
See the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark, turned fields with rags of snow, and darker woods beyond that harbour yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father had been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name. The child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage.
Well, hopefully we get you a contract for doing the audio book in England.
I think it's got to be done in a kind of southern drawl.
Yeah, probably where you got to get there. There's an amazing guy who does them in America that I
Yeah,
listen to quite a lot. But yes, fantastic. I can't wait to read that book. So
you can kind of hear this like Old Testament language
yeah.
as the sort of mixed in with the American Gothic. So Blood Meridian, yeah, a huge breakthrough for him. Still doesn't sell very well. His breakthrough comes in with his next novel in 1992, which is called All the Pretty Horses, and he's 59 when he has his big breakthrough, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, don't give up.
It's, yeah, and this is his most accessible novel. I still say to people, start with All the Pretty Horses. It's kind of a straightforward coming of age story, a portrayal of male friendship. Again, there's violence, but it's a much more lyrical and tender. It's heartbreaking, actually, really heartbreaking story of these two kind of kids who go on this adventure on horses and come of age. And that forms part of a trilogy together with novels The Crossing, which is very good, and Cities of the Plain, which McCarthyites don't particularly rate. But he's now he becomes very famous, and he has in his sort of early 60s seems to have this real run. Does all that trilogy. He writes another play called The Stonemason, which I don't actually know. Apparently, he worked on many projects at once, had a very strong work ethic. And then he has two more really big works. There's No Country for Old Men in 2005, which he had written as a screenplay earlier, but for whatever reason decided to turn it into a novel. But then it's immediately turned into a film by the Coen brothers, and I'm sure people have seen No Country for Old Men. The novel is almost word for word exactly the same as the film. There are a couple of tiny differences at the end, but it's a very faithful adaptation. You must have seen No Country for Old Men,
Yeah,
right?
it's one of my favorite films of the last.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
Absolutely brilliant. So this kind of catapults him into another realm of fame. Actually, before the film of No Country for Old Men comes out, 2006, he published a novel called The Road, which again is very famous and lots of people may have read it.
And there's also a film of this with Viggo Mortensen.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic film.
I haven't actually seen that film. Is it good?
I mean, I loved it. I mean, maybe if you read the book, you might. I don't know. You know, some people have problems with it. It's quite kind of disturbing. It's like particularly people who have grown up in an age when people are terrified of like the apocalypse and climate change destroying everything, and it's quite sort of harrowing.
Yeah. It is very harrowing, but I think we can see McCarthy's thinking developing here because it has a very hopeful ending. Not to give it away, but it's about a father and a son in this post-apocalyptic landscape. The ending of the novel, the son finds these nice people who he can interact with, and so
it's very cool.
It's very beautiful. It's heartbreaking at the
I'm
end.
going to read the book, but there's an amazing scene in it that I always remember, and partly because Viggo is such an incredible actor. He's one of the best actors of the last. He's one of the best screen actors of all time, and he opens at the cat. They've been wandering along this kind of road for ages in this sort of dystopian, post-apocalyptic landscape, and it's awful. And they get into this bunker, and then he finds a can of Coke, and he opens this can of Coke. And the way the scene is so amazing, watching him open this can of Coke and he drinks this can of Coke, and it just makes you think of like how simple it is that we take for granted the kind of Coke. And I just remember that being such an amazing scene.
I must watch it. Actually. I should watch it before the 18th.
Yeah,
but I think in this book we can see McCarthy still wrestling with this question of whether the world is good or bad, and the world in The Road is very unforgiving and merciless. But there are more glimmers of hope in it than there are in Blood Meridian, for sure. And so he seems to be exploring the beacons of hope and goodness and light that are in the world, as merciless and violent as it is. And actually, I think it was Aaron Gwynn on X who, after his death, they go through all his books. So there's pictures of his library, which are brilliant, which we should put online, by the way. He was a voracious reader, even though he kind of bad-mouthed lots of writing. He'd read everything.
I think you should be. I think it's not just for he reads. It's something like 10,000 books he's got in his library, right?
Yeah. It's really, and they've often got notes in them. And apparently, they found in one of the books, I think, or one of his notebooks, he'd written something like, "There is a good force within the universe at its core." And for me, reading his work, I find it hard to believe that he consistently believed that. but we can see him like struggling with that problem. Which brings us on. So in the same year that The Road is published, he also publishes, where is it? The Sunset Limited, which is what we're reading on the 18th of December. And for me, this is the most explicit tackling, like head on, of the problem. Is the world good or bad? Is it worth living? Is there hope? Is there anything beyond a sort of violent material world? He calls it a novel in dramatic form. It's about these two guys, a black guy and a white guy. The black guy has just stopped the white guy from committing suicide on a New York subway, has taken him back to his flat, and they have it out basically about the meaning of life and is life worth living. And it's a bit like, almost like a Socratic dialogue sometimes, actually. I think McCarthy would have read all of that. He would have been steeped in the Greeks. He would have known, there's a fine line between drama and debate and philosophical discourse. And so the Sunset Limited kind of falls on the edge of all of those different things, I think.
Yeah, that's something I have read of McCarthy's. So
and then just to finish it all off there, The Road is such a huge success, he actually gets interviewed by Oprah Winfrey on her show because she loves The Road and picks it as one of her books. And it's quite an amusing YouTube clip of Cormac McCarthy speaking to Oprah Winfrey. But it's very nice. It's interesting. They have an interesting discussion. There's also I only found this the other day. There's a conversation on YouTube between Werner Herzog and Cormac McCarthy, which is a nice pairing. You can see a sort of natural alliance there. They both look at the world as an inhospitable place, but ultimately look for moments of triumphs of human imagination within that space. But just to do the sort of final chapter of his life, I think he always has been, but in the final chapter of his life becomes totally obsessed with science, particularly physics, particularly quantum physics. And he is a trustee of this place called the Santa Fe Institute. And he seems to spend most of his time just talking to scientists. And he says in interviews, his writing and literature are like way, 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 way down on my list of priorities. I just want to sit around and talk to physicists. Which again is very interesting.
Yeah, I can relate to that. That sounds like a good way of living.
Yeah.
Pestering physicists and asking them constant questions about how everything works.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be what he did. And we can tell there's a clip, I think we shared it on Instagram a while ago, but there's a clip of him talking about that he's comparing the prose styles of Wittgenstein and Heidegger. And it's like, yeah, that's why McCarthy's a great writer, because how many other novelists who write accessible, fun stories also can compare the prose styles of Wittgenstein and Heidegger, right? He's a serious guy. He's a heavyweight. We need to promote the
I definitely think that. I think if you read Heidegger and Wittgenstein and you can compare them, you've done your homework.
And then he finally, in 2022, published his final two novels, which are called The Passenger and Stella Maris. And as I said, these are the first ones that I discovered and led me to his other work. They're much less accessible, and The Passenger begins with a plot, but then it goes sort of way off. But the prose is incredible, and there's some visionary, wonderful stuff in there. And he dies soon after, the year after, 2023, aged 89. And I just wanted to close this introduction by talking about, we don't know what his beliefs were, and as we don't really know what his worldview was. He wasn't the kind of writer who would really state that. But, and I think this touches on his interest in science and his wanting to sit around and ask quantum physicists lots and lots of questions. He seems to find the world ultimately mysterious and inaccessible to ultimate human understanding. And perhaps he loved science because he was really coming up against the limits of human understanding there. And I will just quote at the end, the philosopher John Gray, who's a big fan of Cormac McCarthy, after his death, wrote this: "In its surrender to mystery, McCarthy's sensibility was religious. Unlike the religions with which we are familiar, he does not offer any glimpse of a final harmony. Human beings are not accidentally embodied minds for McCarthy, but mortal creatures of flesh and blood whose fates are as random and inescapable as those of birds and toads, all living things find themselves in a state of war. And so I think that does get to the core of what his worldview is, and why we've chosen the Sunset Limited is it does sort of seems to argue that, but he's always giving himself the counter argument. Is there anything else? Is there any kind of transcendent? Is there a goodness at the core of the world? And you can read his work back now that he's finished his life, and you can see him wrestling and sometimes going one way, sometimes going the other. If you want to see a great mind wrestle with such a fundamental question like that, then Cormac McCarthy is your guy. In exquisite prose, of course, and very accessible stories sometimes. And as I say, I think The Sunset Limited is the most explicit debate about that he wrote.
Yeah, yeah. It's Heraclitus who said that war is the father of all things, which kind of lines up quite nicely with that.
McCarthy would completely agree with that. Or I feel like McCarthy would go, we can't escape that is true. Look at human history, that must be true. But also, there's love, and people seem to be kind to each other sometimes. And, he's trying to get a handle on that, trying to account for all that.
Yeah, and if I was thinking of McGilchrist there as well, you could sort of like the coincidence of opposites, the sense of like it's about these things together, and that it's this and that, and then it's the separate and it's the togetherness, and it's allowing all of this. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but he sounds like a great thinker, Ollie, and I can't wait to get into him more. You've been talking to me about him for quite a few years, and I'm so glad to be doing this. That was a brilliant summary. I think we should wrap it up because we don't want to. We just want to keep this nice and short and sweet. And you have recommended Aaron Gwynn, who might provide, Maura McCarthy. Yes, so that's brilliant, Ollie. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Thank you, Ollie, for that fantastic summary of Cormac McCarthy's life. Please subscribe to our channel and like and comment and all that kind of stuff. It really helps us grow and get involved with the discussion. We've really loved having reading the comments from the McGilchrist video. And please come and see the show on the 18th of December in London, in Westminster. The tickets will be going fast, so get yours and come along, and we will explore this text together in a space and have the incredible Aris Roussanos give a response. So there we go. Thank you very much, Ollie.